and welcome to another episode of the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I am your host, Matt Belair, and today's guest is the founder of the Global Consciousness Project, a long running international collaboration of 100 researchers studying interactions of consciousness and the environment. He is an experimental psychologist with a Ph.D. from New York University. His background also includes physics and engineering. He was a research coordinator for the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory at Princeton University from 1980 to 2002. He has directed the Global Consciousness Project since its inception in 1997. His work integrates consciousness research and parapsychology and looks to quantum physics with a focus on information fields and entanglement to help explain anomalous effects of consciousness documented in rigorous experiments. His public presentations focus on implications of research showing we are all interconnected and on our potential for conscious evolution. Welcome to the show, Roger Nelson.
Thank you very much, Matt. What an introduction.
Yeah, what an amazing piece of work.
Right. It's amazing in many respects. And one of the most amazing things is this project, along with a whole lot of other things in sort of the parapsychological realm, continue to produce evidence, even though mainstream science doesn't have a place for it. It's almost miraculous.
Right. And so for people who are unfamiliar with you and your work, you have a massive background. You've been in this field for a long time. Do you want to kind of give us a little bit about, your background, your field of research, and how you got to where you are today? And then maybe we can dive deep into where you're going.
Well, I started this kind of work, or at least thinking about it, when I was a high school kid. And came across books that told about psychic experiments where people tried to guess what card was going to come up next and so forth. And being a kind of science nerd, I rounded up a couple of friends who were interested in that kind of stuff. And we put together real experiments, good quality experiments. And they came out with just exactly the right kind of results. Interesting, but not overwhelming. It wasn't like we'd made a mistake. Instead, those experiments said, wait a minute, there really is something about this connection of the mind to the world, to the environment in which it's embedded. And so for many years, I didn't do anything more about that. But in 1980, I moved from a professor's job in northern Vermont to Princeton University, where I took a role in the laboratory called PAIR. Many people have heard of it, but that laboratory was set up by the dean of the School of Engineering because he and some sponsors at McDonnell Douglas Aircraft Corporation were interested in the possibility that a human consciousness, if you really get highly emotional or have a very, very powerful interest, maybe your consciousness might affect the sensitive instruments that surround somebody in an airplane, right, in the cockpit. So they set up a lab. I came to help make that lab as rigorous as possible experimentally. And then, so for 27 years, that lab pursued the question, can human consciousness directly interact with the environment? Can human consciousness access information that's about a situation maybe half a world away, maybe tomorrow or yesterday? And it turns out that the answer to those rather hard questions is, generally speaking, something like yes. It's not easy to prove that we are connected with each other, or that we are able to change the way the world works very slightly. But the answer in very good experiments over many years, and not just at Princeton, but in laboratories around the world, is always a kind of not qualified yes, but a yes that is only statistically supported. In other words, we have good reason scientifically to believe that these things happen, but they're not the kind of thing that anybody has yet been able to put into practical uses, like switching your television station or opening your garage door just by thinking about it. Maybe one of these days. Anyway, that work in the laboratory at Princeton. I'm maybe giving you too much detail here, but basically, we had a set of physical experiments and a set of what we call remote viewing or remote perception experiments. The first had some kind of a device, a random number generator, a fountain, a pendulum, some kind of physical device which people tried to affect. We had a very nice protocol that allowed people to try to get higher numbers or lower numbers, or just let the machine be. So this kind of balanced protocol helped to make it a very clear scientific outcome. And so the remote perception experiments are also very interesting, but because I'm leading into the Global Consciousness Project, it's the random number generator experiments where people intentionally try to change the behavior of a quantum level random device. Those in the laboratory showed people, yes, people can change the performance very slightly, not every day, but sufficiently often that it kind of adds up to the point where you have to believe the statistics. You assume that the experiment is done well, and the result says, yes, mind touches the world. We are not stuck inside this skull case. We are out in the universe. We miniaturized those instruments and took them out into the field. We went to churches where, or some other kind of situation where there'd be a kind of ritual engagement of everybody in the situation. I think of that kind of experiment, which we eventually did by bringing one of our devices there, as an attempt to find out if there can be such a thing as a consciousness field generated by a group. In other words, group consciousness. When a whole lot of people come together, we know this from experience. When a lot of people do the same thing together, pray together, do a ritual, enjoy a concert that's just mind-blowing and captures everybody, those kinds of things create a consciousness field, which not only engages all the people involved in the group, but it engages our devices. So they change their behavior a little bit to join the group, so it seems. And now, finally, the next stage in the development of the Global Consciousness Project is to expand that notion to a whole global consciousness field, and to place these recording instruments, the random number generators, all over the world, to create a network that's a kind of world scale instrument to ask the same kind of question. If we come together because of an emergency or because of a shared interest in celebration, if we come together, do we create a global consciousness field? And does that cause our instrument to react in a way that we can say is correlated with the gathering of consciousness? And once again, the answer is yes. So that's a long-winded introduction to what I do.
No, it's perfect. It's extremely fascinating, and there's so many avenues that I'd love to go down because I'm aware of your work. To touch on just us affecting our reality, I heard that Einstein, I think it was a scientific fair in 1930s or 40s, and some of the scientists had said, if you're doing an experiment, then you're affecting the experiment. And Einstein originally was like, no, that's not the case. But then over time, he's like, oh, okay, no, if I am doing it, I am affecting the experiment. Are you aware of that, or have you heard of that before?
Oh, yes. It's sometimes discussed as what we call an observer effect. The there's a certain kind of question or conundrum in quantum physics, which, without going into a lot of detail, the mathematical description of what's happening in a system is not determined completely until an observation is made. So, and the nature of that observation even sometimes changes the answer to the question you're asking. One of the classic examples is about light. Light is sometimes thought of as particles, photons, and sometimes it's thought of as waves, light waves. And it seems like the two interpretations of light must be incompatible, but they're not. They're actually complementary. They're both about the same thing. And the interesting aspect of the experimental situation is that what you see, light as being a particle or a wave, depends on how you look. So if you set up a certain kind of experiment, you will see particles. You will perceive light as particles. A different kind of experiment will show that it is waves.
Wow. Yeah, it's really interesting. Well, so, I think that your work is very important because I think that all of us realize that we're connected. We know that there's something going on. We feel like we're a part of something bigger, but it's hard to measure, obviously, and that's where you come in. I remember hearing about a study done on crime in Washington, I think in 1993, maybe in the 90s, and a group of meditators went to Washington, a very high crime rate, and they basically meditated on peace and cohesion. And the mayor of the city was like, yeah, go for it. Like, you guys are crazy. This isn't going to do anything. But crime had actually decreased by up to 23%.
Right.
You've probably heard of that study before.
Right. That's the Transcendental Meditation, or TM group, who are based in Iowa, but who have done that same kind of experiment in many environments. Washington is one of them, but around that same time, they also did some in the Middle East, where there's been this bubbling cauldron of uncertainty and sometimes violence. And the same result was found there. The number of people killed, the number of attacks, the number of accidents in city traffic, all of those measures of what you might think of as sort of negative outcome data, all of those measures dropped during the period of time that, and they are mostly the so-called city meditators, people who are more advanced and who really just sit in meditation. In fact, they don't even try to change the way the atmosphere of violence is. They just sit and meditate. It's really remarkable. Much more recently, I think this might have also been maybe 10 years ago, again, they had gathered as many of the city meditators as possible in Washington, and they did this for a whole summer long. And I don't normally, my technology just doesn't allow doing events that are a whole summer long. So what I did was a sample. I took every Saturday, that was when the most meditators were present, every Saturday over the, I don't know, I think I had 14 pieces of the data, put that all together. As has so often happened, we got a really very strong effect, indicating that, this wasn't part of their project. They were just meditating in Washington, and they were getting these other measures about violence and so forth. And completely independent of that, out in the stratosphere, whatever, actually what we call the Noosphere, we had this network of random devices, which apparently reacted also to the meditation practices of these TM cities. Cool stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing. The way that my mind kind of wraps around this is like, so as we're going throughout the day, we're generating 70 to 90,000 thoughts and most of those are repetitive, and it's affecting the field. You can realize this as an individual when you start to clean up your thoughts through meditation, and it'll start to change your field and your reality. But there's also the group consciousness, and because the group consciousness, for the most part, is very scattered, you're being hit by television and media and scare tactics and all this kind of stuff. So what's going on in the background is being flung into actual reality. And one of the ways that I put it is kind of like, every thought you have is like throwing a little piece of Play-Doh out in front into your future. Every random thought is a little spot. So you might not think like anything, but thoughts really have a resonance. And as a group, as a big hive, we're all doing that. And so I kind of have a theory where if we could get, I don't know what the number is, maybe 1 million people, maybe 4 million people that would meditate doing this on a larger scale on peace every single day, maybe 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. or something like that. And if we had the larger number, we would have this tipping in consciousness and come to a cohesion, kind of like the Celestine prophecy effect or something like that. Just curious what your thoughts are on a statement like that.
Well, I'm totally in alignment with that. I think you're right.
Nice.
And I'm not entirely sure that the numbers matter so much. But the more people we gather to recognize the oneness that we share and to give a little energy to this, to the expectations and intentions for a positive, a bright future, the more the better. So you probably know that there are, I don't know how many, dozens, hundreds of organizations and even more individuals that have the same general idea. And a lot of people are working on this. And I personally think it's helping a lot. It's already working, only we just don't know it very well. One of the reasons I can say it's already working is that we have been asking of the network, the instrument that the GCP runs, we've been asking what happens during these kind of prayer meetings, meditation, giant meditation gatherings, demonstrations for peace, those kinds of things. We have more than 100 events where we've done a formal examination. And one of my colleagues a couple of years ago did a kind of composite survey asking, what about those kinds of events? And he called them a wonderful name, global harmony events. Okay, put them all together. They're not all the same thing. They're not all meditations. They show a few parts in 10,000 likelihood that the change could happen by chance. In other words, there's a little contribution from every one of those events across the 100, 110 or thereabouts we have actually looked at formally. So it's, I guess I said every one of them. Some of them go backwards. Most of them don't go backwards. Most of them add a little bit to the mounting evidence that when people gather for this kind of purpose, for the celebration of peace and love and wishes for a bright future, it has an effect in the world. Say our devices, our physical devices, they live in, connected to the back side of a computer in Fiji and 1 and 2 or 3 in Australia and, all over Europe, a couple of them in Japan and so on and so on. We have them, they're scattered all around the world. They add up to a kind of global question or a global instrument that can answer questions like that. But enough said. Yes, the answer is absolutely. We should just go for it.
Amazing. So in a nutshell, they're random number generators, and then when these cohesive events or even a worldwide catastrophe happens, I know that you noticed a spike for 9/11 and things like that. The numbers will be less random, and the mathematical chances are
right.
Not
technically, what happens is that with these devices, which are they're high quality, instrument quality random number generators, they are designed to be independent. When we calibrate them, they don't do anything except produce random numbers. They are essentially theoretically correct random number generators. And what happens and now they're scattered all around the world. They're hundreds or thousands of miles separated one from another in the network. But what happens during these events, both the negative tragedies and whatnot, and the positive meditation events and so on, what happens is they become slightly correlated with each other. Instead of being completely random, they start working together and become correlated in a fashion that is completely unexplainable with ordinary physics and mathematical statistics. It just doesn't make any sense. So the alternative to being just mystified is to think in terms of what's going on in the human consciousness realm. Those events that we look at are all like each other in that they bring a lot of us into a synchronized frame of mind and emotion especially. So we share in a deep way that we don't even know about necessarily. We just are doing at the same time something like being frightened or feeling deep compassion or feeling love for our neighbors or feeling, the presence of God in our lives or whatever it is, we're sharing this kind of thing. And that sharing somehow engages these random physical devices so that they too become synchronized with us and with each other.
Amazing.
Yeah, pretty remarkable.
The way that I see it, it can be pretty simple. Having a background in athletics, the way that I learned skateboarding is I would just watch a good skateboarder, and then I would learn the trick. So, okay, that's a single example, and then I learn about mirror neurons, right? So the same neurons in my brain are firing as when I'm watching. So then I'm having a physical effect. But then it goes, I think, a little step deeper when we think of something like Burning Man, where I know you've done a little bit of research there, and which is where I first found out about your work. We were having the discussion about meditation and, all of us coming together as it is at Burning Man. And what I found really interesting at Burning Man, I wrote an article on it after my first or second burn, and it was What's Right with Burning Man, Ethereum Frequency and Vibration. And the very simple concept of it was that, when you go to Burning Man, there's 10 tenets, radical inclusion, self-reliance, blah, 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 be a good human being, essentially, and then gifting. So my first burn, within a day, you realize everybody's just giving you stuff. Nobody's trying to get anything. There's not anything for sale. So all of a sudden, more or less, we're in our hearts, and our hearts emit a signal that's stronger than our mind. I can't remember what it is. It could be 80 or even higher, but it's that magnetic field that's stronger. So we become in this cohesion. So people even don't believe in the law of attraction or anything like that. They'll say playa magic. So you'll need some scissors, and you'll just like, oh man, I need some scissors. And somebody in a tutu will go by with a comic size huge clippers for whatever reason. And you'll ask him for them, and he'll come over and give you a hug, and he'll help you out. And this happens over and over. Sometimes it's with food or an experience you need, or, I've had it myself personally where I was really down and, somebody picked me up, just it was the right person. And, so I feel like this is a field that's created, and it's the Heart Math Institute as well. And I'm not sure exactly what the science is on this, but I heard that when your heart emits that signal, it's actually felt worldwide within a very short period of time. So this kind of goes into that group resonance. And I know that you're talking about the Noosphere a lot. So I was wondering if that correlates with the Noosphere, and if you could add on to kind of my little rant there.
Yeah. Well, I love that description of what you and everybody else experiences. Since I haven't been there to experience that buildup, I think in terms of, oh, sounds cool and all that, but then the burn itself becomes a point of focus for people who have been practicing being connected for now several days. Now at this singular moment, the burn begins, or the burn is started up, and everybody is amazingly focused and totally together. I think we become one, and the burn shows, I don't know, a especially powerful version of that. It's almost like meditation. It's a different kind of meditation. So anyway, what I predict is that during such a time, you'll have this kind of integrated personal field of compassion, as you were describing it. And at that, I don't know the physics of this exactly, but somehow that produces a kind of information. It is information. It has structure. It's meaningful. And that information field gathers in these random number devices as well. And in terms of what HeartMath is doing, it's probably even a little more direct, because our hearts are, as you say, all emitting a field, and those fields, like our consciousness fields, personal consciousness fields, they're all kind of randomly related in normal life, in the regular world. But when you start doing things like rituals together, or loving in the Burning Man context, when you start doing that, then the heart rhythms, the mental field of frequencies begin to synchronize. And when they get highly synchronized, then it's very clear that there are new information fields that are being created. In other words, group consciousness is not an abstraction; it's a real thing. It's something that if you come into a meeting or a gathering of people who are already together, you feel it, and you find it. Unless you're a strange person, you find it quite easy to become part of that, to be accepted in to that group. You asked me, how does this all relate to Noosphere? Well, the Noosphere is actually a name that comes from long ago, from the first part of the last century, a Russian biophysicist, and his name was Vladimir Vernadsky. And he was a friend of a paleontologist from France who was a Jesuit priest. His name was Teilhard de Chardin. The two of them both were thinking about the same kind of thing, one from a biophysical point of view, one from a kind of spiritual point of view. And that same thing was the next stage of human evolution. If you ever have a chance to read The Phenomenon of Man by Teilhard de Chardin, it's worth it. It's a poetic expression of how we come through the ages from simple molecules to living molecules, how we evolve to become what we are, and how we're not really quite finished with the job yet. We still have this next stage, which he explicitly referred to as noosphere, Teilhard de Chardin. And that is a layer of intelligence, a layer of thought and manifestation for the Earth, a kind like an atmosphere or an ionosphere, but now a noosphere of meaning, a sphere of knowing, knowledge, and responsibility for the Earth. So that's our goal. Most of us don't know it, and even those of us who do know about it don't necessarily know how to get there, because it requires all of us to become one in a much more profound sense than seems to be happening at the moment. We got a lot of it started up, little touches here and there, but the noosphere is growing. It might, when I write about it, I usually kind of acknowledge that it's maybe in a kind of infancy. At least it's very young. There's a lot of growth to do, and but what's super interesting, especially when you start thinking about it, who am I? What can I do? What's really interesting is we have the option always of working in that context, becoming conscious of each other, becoming conscious of our connections, becoming aware that we're actually neurons in a great all-encompassing brain mind. Once we learn how to consciously connect instead of unconsciously, we'll have this noosphere kind of not exactly in hand, but it will be there before us.
Yeah, it's interesting, super fascinating. My background, I've done a lot more study and work into kind of like the martial arts aspect of going in meditation, consciousness, spirituality. So a lot of the things that I've read and looked into and experienced talks about an evolution in consciousness. I've heard that the next evolution will allow us to kind of have access to group memory, kind of like a tapping into the noosphere on command. So when we speak about consciousness, or people say, the next evolution, this big leap of consciousness, do you see that actually happening? Do you see us moving towards this, and what does that look like to you?
It really is a good question. It's a little, answering it requires being sure that we're all using the same words, that we mean the same thing by something like interconnection and consciousness and intention and all that. But that being said, I think I do see progress, a kind of movement that I hope is unstoppable. There are tremendous numbers of people, more all the time. I mean, I grew up a long time ago in the age of the hippies and, the amazing gatherings of flower children and all that kind of stuff. And at the time, we all thought it was looking pretty good. But it turned out that most of us just became fathers and mothers and, working in support of our existence and so on. So we didn't exactly forget all that stuff, but it didn't come easily to fruit. So that's a preamble to saying that I see the same thing now. I see it in people like you and all of those friends of yours you talk to about these things, and there are many. And you've got what is this called? A blog? No, this is called a
podcast.
A podcast. All right. I knew it was something
sure,
like
blog
that.
Too. Yeah, close enough.
And it's quite possible that you are touching not just the minds in terms of interest, but the minds in terms of compassion and heart of really very large numbers of people. And this is a sort of thing that is growing. I'm quite sure. One of the very practical, real world analogs to what I talk about, the noosphere, is the internet and the cellular communication, the mobiles. I have a smartphone, but I hardly use it, right? But people your age use it in such many of you, in such a productive way, connecting with people on the other side of the world who speak different languages, who don't have the same kind of political structures to live in, and so on and so on. That kind of interconnection is real, and it's very powerful. And it cannot very long. It can't be very long before that washes over the whole of society in such a way that we have to start recognizing the need and the possibility, and in fact, the beauty of cooperation and building a world together that we don't any longer dominate, but instead we manage and live together with. One of the problems that we've had in many cultures is the belief that our role as human beings is so much different from animals and plants and so on. It's not. Ultimately, it is the same. And we have the role of being on the earth and integrating and living together with, and being a part of a matrix of life, where the criterion for what's valuable is well-being and wellness of all the members and creatures in our surrounding. So for a long, long time, there's been this kind of dominionist notion that we are here to dominate, to manage the earth to our own benefit. So not so much anymore. I think I hope I'm quite right about, and I'm pretty sure I am, because I talked to quite a few people who aren't in my age group, and it's great. I see a whole lot of optimism in what people are doing, how participatory people are becoming.
Amazing. When you're talking there, my mind went to a whole different slew of places. One of them, the quickest thought I'll put out there, I'll try to go in sequence here, is the Book of Ra. If you've ever heard of that channeled material, it talked about, to ascend, or the harvest, which I've read in a lot of spiritual books. They talk about it in Autobiography of a Yogi as well, that you need to be above 51% service to others. So I just say it's like 51%, not a selfish bastard. It's like just generally, cooperate with people. And with 2012 happened, that was the Mayan calendar switch into now the collective is you're more likely to have a cooperative human being or a person on the other side. So that was the one thing that I thought about. And then the second thing was, I've been talking about him a lot lately because I've been going through his work, but it's Dan Winter. Are you aware of Dan Winter?
Mm-hmm.
So really interesting.
Again, it's the name I know, but I don't know him personally.
He's a really interesting fellow. He is a physicist. Is he? Yeah, he's a physicist that was mentored by Buckminster Fuller. And so he goes into,
that's one of my heroes.
Yeah, Buckminster, So I'm kind of just I was in the spiritual side, lots of meditation, all that. Now I'm being thrown into the science side, which I kind of rejected back in the day because as like, I don't need you to tell me that if I meditate or visualize, that it's going to work. I just know this internally, and I'm willing to, I don't need science to prove it or not. But now it's bringing the science to that, which is exciting. So I've been going through a lot of his work and, 8-10 hours in, he's talking about essentially that you need to build plasma, which is your soul or essence. So you do this through building charge spin density, and then that's the idea. You do it by achieving charge spin density, I believe, and you'd have to look at this to make sure it's right because I try to wrap my head around it. And so I'm going through all this, and to build up your aura or your spirit, so you can take memory through death. And he's showing you this through physics. So most of it, it's like I'm just letting it wash over. And it comes back to such basic fundamentals. I'm like, okay, after all of this 2-hour video, 3-hour video, what do I do? And one of the things he talks about is have shareable thoughts. When you have shareable thoughts, it will actually grow your aura. It will grow that plasma field around your body. And then the other ones are clean food, clean water, exercise, sunlight, and grounding the earth's energy, actually. And that's a big one that a lot of people are missing. And so it's really, really fascinating stuff. And I don't know if your work correlates or kind of merges with that idea.
Well, I think so. It's we're definitely we're playing the same game. It's like when you first began speaking about this, you mentioned this you need to be 51%. Sharing, can be doing stuff for other people. The way I interpret it, it can be as high as you want, and it will be good for you. The more you give, the healthier you are. It's just amazing. The generosity of spirit is not a zero-sum game. That made me think of another thing that most people don't really recognize, and it's somewhat in the same general territory. But I want to mention it just because it's worth putting in your quiver. Forgiveness. We get hit every now and then, and it might be by some inanimate kind of thing, or it might be another person or whatever. One of the best pieces of medicine you can know is that the very best thing you can do when you've been hit or hurt is to forgive that and go on. Because if you don't, you'll carry the burdens of being angry or being hurt or whatever it is indefinitely. So forgiving that other person, for example, absolves him or her and probably does them some good, but it really does you some good because you don't have to worry about it anymore. It's gone. And that's very much like a different version of the sharing business. If you share something with some other person, is it a loss? Not at all. It is a multiplication. You bring more into the world by giving it to other people. So,
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, I 100% agree.
Yeah.
So,
Plenty of good
so
recipes. Go ahead.
right. When I was looking through some of your work, I haven't seen this. I might have watched it a long time ago, but your work was featured in a documentary called Dimension 5, Mind Over Matter. And I was curious if any of your word led into dimensions, because a lot of the people are talking about, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth dimension. Do you have any insight onto what the fifth dimension is in your perspective or higher? Um, and the second question would be, I've heard a lot about densities as well, explained in different ways. And so if you have any insight into dimensions and what they are and how you see, like, in the spiritual world, they talk about lower level energies propping up higher level energies, celestial realms, things like that. Do you find those to be real and accessible and here, or,
Yeah.
or what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, I'm going to tell you something that isn't what you expect. Is I
Okay.
don't think about those things generally. My wife says, you're a born professorial type. You will, and I guess it's not too bad to say, you will bullshit your way through any kind of a question. And that's sort of true. I mean, I'm capable of going on about energies and frequencies and so on, but I'm actually a little bit impatient with that kind of stuff a lot of times because I think it's all metaphor, and if people recognize it's metaphor and therefore a way of presenting ideas and communicating things of value, all that is so super cool as far as I'm concerned. But to go back to the dimensions, I know I'm trained in physics and mathematics and so forth, so I'm quite content with the 3 plus one that Einstein found adequate. And I'm also I'm not averse to considering that there are dimensions that we don't know about, and including those which are required, runs up to bigger numbers like 11 dimensions if you want to think about the universe in terms of string theory. But I'm speaking of impatient. I'm a little bit impatient personally with that kind of stuff, partly because I'm not a good enough mathematician to really go through that, but partly because I think it's an abstraction so far from where we are as human beings that it's for me and for many of us kind of a waste of time. That's good for people who are think tank physicists and mathematicians, and it's a kind of glorious art form as far as I'm concerned, but it isn't doing what we need, which is talking about the human energies of love and compassion and appreciation, forgiveness, and the generosity. All of those kinds of things we can talk about them in poetic terms, and we talk about them in quasi-scientific terms about the energies and so on. But to me, they're all a kind of matrix of human being. We are really quite remarkable creatures. We're able to reflect on who we are and what it means to think about stuff. In other words, we can think about thinking. Who else can do that? We're very lucky. We can even think about what it means to have emotions. What are emotions? What are they made of? We can think about that kind of stuff, and we kind of need some metaphoric help sometimes. So people who write poetry, beautiful poetry, will express better than we otherwise see what it means to be in love, what it means to be loved, those kinds of things. And their tools are often metaphors, and they may indeed be describing energies. Okay, I've gone on about it enough. The basic notion I have is that um, I really kind of appreciate but I see it more as a poetic art form than as a physical kind of thing, to talk about the multi-dimensional spaces in which we might exist, or the fabulously rich array of energetic frequencies that we may emit and absorb. We're pretty good. We're amazing absorbers of information, energetic frequencies, and so on. What we have to worry about is the artificial ones. For example, I was recently at a conference where there were a couple of very impressive people talking about how bad it is to be sitting, as I am, 6 feet from a Wi-Fi router. It's not good for my physical being, but I do it all the time. Maybe that's why it's hard to keep track of everything.
Well, it was definitely not the answer I expected, but I really loved how grounded it was, though, and I think that's very important, especially today's day and age, and the spaces that I'm in, and people talking about all these different things, whether it's psychedelics and other realms, and ayahuasca. I've done that, and all these different things. But you got to ground. That's one of the things for ayahuasca. Doing it, I hear people do it, and then their lives. You get a clear message there of what to ground out. It might show you, hey, I want to change, my health is bad, so it shows you go to the gym and eat vegetables, and that's it's pretty simple, but you got to do it. And so that internal work of going through everything that you need to integrate. So I really love that answer. So what I wanted to
take off
ask,
my shoes when I go outside. When I walk
there you
around
go.
why should I have shoes on? And by the way, these same people who are telling us worrying things about Wi-Fi routers and so on, we're also talking about being grounded. And they were actually, they were saying they were thinking in terms of the physics of electromagnetism, right? But it's more than that, as you and the people that you're talking about know. It's more than just electromagnetism. There's a kind of necessary connection of our being to the great earth being on which we, or maybe of which we are a part. And if we separate ourselves from each other or from the great earth being by artificial means of whatever sort, we're losing something. We are subtracting from our very existence something that's quite important. So yeah, grounding is good.
Yeah, well, that was one of the Dan Winner's fifth element was like the energy, the resonance from the earth, and there's a direct correlation with apartment buildings and people who work in offices. The higher up you go, the more there is an illness because you need that energy. That's actually a part of us getting the energy we need. And what I wanted to follow up with on your comment there, because it was a really beautiful, grounded answer. So, in all the research that you have done, what would you recommend, as an individual to have a harmonious life, expanded consciousness, more love and joy and the things that we want? And then also worldwide, if you could make a change, whether it's in education or in value sets or in media, or you could empower everyone on the earth with a belief or an experience, what kinds of things would come to mind for expressing that question?
Yeah. There many thoughts kind of converge on the one idea, uh, which has so many forms. The idea is connect. We are all connected, but we don't understand that in an intellectual way, and therefore we don't practice it as we might. We do it one at a time. We fall in love, and that can be an absolutely, mind-boggling, heart growing kind of experience. You suddenly become not just two people, but something else. You become a kind of third being that is the two people somehow combined and creating something new. Same thing when you join into a group of, families are somewhat like that, although families often argue with each other and don't really quite realize how wonderful it is to be that closely connected with other people. But so the recommendation is connect. Do connect. And don't ever imagine that you are alone or separated. You're not. We are always partly integrated into a huge, huge life being, which is all of us. And that's not even just all people, that's all the animals on Earth and all the plants, and even the Earth itself, the kind of rocks and mountains. They are beings too. If you go and live in an area with, mountains is one thing, but trees are easier to grasp because they're graspable. Go spend some time with a tree, connect with the tree. Then you will kind of, I think most people will experience, as I do, and I suspect you already know about, some kind of a understanding that this is a sentient being, some kind of with a kind of consciousness that's different from mine, but which is very real. It's very much part of the important universe. It's like the way we think isn't the only way to think. Yeah. Anyway, I guess I could add another word which everybody is familiar with, and that is love. Loving other people. And the same thing we were talking about a little bit earlier. Celebrating other people, enjoying, appreciating. Appreciation is one of the procedures for growing heart, for connecting your heart with your mind. And it's sort of the other side of forgiveness. Appreciation doesn't even require anything already. You can just go forth and appreciate it. And it's like love, and it's like compassion. All of those things go out into the world and they reflect back to you. And those are the kinds of things that connect us ultimately, and that is what we want.
Amazing. 100% agree. Really, really beautiful answer. What it made me think of, there's a book called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, and he talks about the number one motivator in business, and it's not money, it's actually appreciating one another. And it kind of goes back to this simple idea: when we're more loving and kind to others, their frequency or vibration or is going to go up, and then their internal dialogue of what they're telling themselves, that kind of those mental thoughts that are getting shot out, those are more positive and they're more connected, because you literally just connected with somebody in real time. So now you're going to have more connected thoughts as you are going throughout the day, until somebody cuts you off in traffic and then they go some other way. Amazing. Beautiful.
It's very easy to have this kind of experience, especially if you have a pet, a dog or a cat or whatever. If you appreciate the dog or cat, it comes back. But it's even more profound and obvious, clear, strong if it's a human. So if you have a little kid to appreciate, and you do appreciate the little kid, this is not pretending. This is like, wow, that is really so cool what you just did. What happens to the kid? The kid grows like the light. It goes on, like a light. It becomes, and just as you said, positive thoughts and manifestations rise up in the ocean of spirit. Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah, 100% agree. I saw it in real time the other day. My dad, I love my dad. He's awesome. The challenge with him, he's very negative focused. So there's a young kid at our house the other day, and he made a bad shot with the little bow and arrow, and he goes, "Oh, you're a bad shot." And I go, "Dad, like that's not what you say," because then the kid, the next couple of times was like, then he said the words, "I'm a bad shot," and identified with it, and then that can carry out to other spaces. So,
Hmm.
with our youth and with with each other, we hold on to things from childhood, that we don't really get rid of, rather than having that appreciation. And that's how people have the energy and ability and the confidence to grow. It's the resonance and knowing that they're good enough that they can do these kinds of things and, create their lives and live in harmony with all things. So it's really, really fundamental,
Right.
but really important, and on the resonance spectrum, coming from an athletic background, I can do a backflip on my snowboard without thinking about it because I know what it feels like. I've done it a lot
Yeah.
of times. The
Yeah.
first time I did it, it was terrifying, right? I had no idea what it felt like. I actually did 1.5 because I was so afraid of falling on my head.
Oops.
Um, yeah, right. So I almost did 1.5. And so when we get into the feeling of appreciation, the actual feeling, like you said, don't fake it, or gratitude is another powerful one, or abundance, or the ideal life, or these positive states, we're actually resonating at a different level. And Tesla said, if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of frequency and vibration. And that's, again, that mental charge that's going out into the noosphere and getting connected to all things. So that's kind of how my mind wraps around it. I know you're a busy man, and you have amazing things that you gotta do. And I wish I could talk to you all day. I wanted to ask maybe two quick questions, but the first one being, if you have time, if you,
I
it's
do.
up to you. Okay, yes.
Yeah.
It's if your work goes the next 5 or 10 years, and it were in your mind, the results were what you wanted, and you got all the things that you wanted to kind of then test further results. What would that look like? What would be the ideal result? And then when we had the result, how would that serve the whole? How would that change how we look at the world?
Yeah. Very nice questions. I'm content that the phenomenon of interconnection shown in the data is real. And we've already done so many kinds of examinations of the data. We know a lot of things about the structure, which structure there shouldn't be any structure at all in random data like this. But there's several kinds. We know things about how the separation of the random number generators affects the correlations. We know something about the time course, how long it takes to build up to. We know so much about it that we can even make parallels with what it is like to be conscious or have a thought or a perception in human consciousness terms. It's just this global consciousness is really much the same but slow. It's about maybe somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 times as slow. I should put it the other way around. It's moving, this global consciousness moves at a glacial pace. It's kind of like Earth size in terms of how long it takes for things to happen, which makes sense. If you think about how long history takes, things don't change overnight. They don't change in an instant like that, even though there may be moments that are really important and they are the beginning of big shifts and so on. So all that's to say we know a lot about the data already. There are some kinds of questions that could be answered if we changed the system, made it much bigger, and so on. But I'm letting other people do that. There's what's called the consciousness app that's already almost ready to be released for people to put on their mobile phones or mobile devices, and that will allow people to do quite a number of things that they're kind of fun. They're games and maybe personal interest measurement systems and so on. But it also allows people to participate in the gathering of huge amounts of data because there are huge numbers of people in principle who might be running the app. and the data will be uploaded to a giant database system in the cloud. And there we'll be able to ask some questions that we haven't already. And they'll have to do with things that maybe are taken from other social media. What's the trending search terms in Google search, or what are the primary Twitter emotions that are being expressed at the moment? That kind of stuff. See what kind of correlation there might be. I've done a little bit of that kind of stuff, but my database is much older and longer than Twitter or Facebook. Those seem like they've been around forever, but they're only 5 or 10 years old. So anyway, there's a lot of questions that can be asked, and they will be asked, but by other people. And I'm helping to think about what good questions there might be. But they maybe more personally important answer to the kind of question you're asking is what am I doing? What will I be doing with what this project has produced? And that is basically proselytizing, basically going to conferences or talking with people like you have a platform where there's a possibility of spreading the word, so to speak, that we are all connected. And it's possible that we can increase the rate at which evolution, personal human style evolution occurs. There's a lot of uphill battles. If we look out at the political world, it's not a pretty sight. And so there's a lot of work to do. But so my job, I think, is to engage as many people as I can in pursuing the same general philosophy of emphasizing the best aspects of humanity that we represent or can represent, including such things as the dedication to reductions of violence, prayer gatherings and meetings like Burning Man that prove to us how important the inner world is, provided it's allowed to connect with the inner world of others. We become, more completely human as we increase our integration into these ideas of connection, love, compassion, gratitude, and so forth. Yeah. So that's where I'm going. I'm also doing a little pruning of trees and picking of flowers, a little cultivation, in very local terms, but nothing wrong with a little beauty.
Amazing. Wonderful. Well, I could definitely speak to you all day. So, but I know you have things to do. Just thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you for your work and sharing that message, which is so important. Something that I'll say a lot on the podcast when I have amazing people like you is, I can say these things as like a bearded snowboarder traveler, no science background or whatever. But when somebody like you comes and dedicates so much research and when you look at the data, it's undeniable. It says we are all connected. What you do matter, you matter, your thoughts matter. And when we work together, we can make this a better planet. And this is real. We know we can do this. This isn't hearsay. We've got the data on that. So very, very beautiful, very powerful. So thank you so much for that. And so I'll leave it with one final question. And that's just if there's anything that you would have wished that I would have asked you, or if there's anything that you wanted to leave the listeners with or talk about before we close off.
Well, you ask very wonderful questions, and I probably could think of something. But no, this has been a lovely conversation because your questions are not just questions. They're insights into where we have to go. And I think that's where your work and mine cross paths and become much more powerful as a result. So, yeah, more power to you. Right on, et cetera, et cetera. So the only thing, I guess I'll just say one more thing. It's a kind of a repetition, is that we are connected. We are all connected. That's the name of a book I'm writing and soon will be published. But what that means at a certain level is that since you have to write the book or get on a program with somebody like you to tell anybody about it, well, that means we don't know this. So it's important for us to recognize, to come to understand that we are connected in some way that's unconscious now, but it can be brought up to a kind of higher level of our internal and personal consciousness, and then shared with other people to the point in the future, and I hope it isn't long from now, that we really widely accept and express this idea that we are all one and that we are capable and we're also responsible for evolving consciously to become what human beings have the potential to be, which is stewards of our destiny. We can decide where we want to go, and we can go there. And that's always before us as a choice. And as soon as we can grab hold of that, every individual grab hold of that potential and start moving forward with others toward the future of man, or the manifestation of Noosphere, which Teilhard said was in fact our destiny. I agree with him, and I agreed also with Buckminster Fuller, who was I had the rather remarkable experience of attending his either last or second to last public lecture before he died. It was in Washington, and I was with a bunch of Sufis and sitting in the front row next to the leader of this group, Sufi group, and so my hero, Buckminster Fuller, was sort of talking to me, and my friend Himayat said, "He's passing Baraka." I don't know if you know what that means, but it is a kind of blessing of knowledge and information and responsibility to go forward with this work. Right on. I pass Baraka to you.
To me.
You.
Oh, wow.
Actually, to all of us.
Thank you. Holy crap. Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, yeah, I didn't know what that meant, so I was kind of digesting it all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But
wow.
Let me know. I don't know for sure where my camera is. Oh, I probably have to answer the phone, but I pass Baraka to all of you.
Wonderful.
Oh, Matt, was
awesome.
Great talking with you, and I wish you well.
Where can people find you? Do you want to grab that phone? Awesome.
Hello?
Wonder who it is.
Yes. Can I put you on hold for just a minute? Okay.
That's awesome.
This actually is an important call.
But where can people find you? That's the last thing I just wanted to ask. If they want to research.
The easiest version of my website is global-mind.org. Globalmind.org. Global-mind.org. Or you can go to noosphere.princeton.edu. That works too. And if all else fails, you can Google global consciousness, and I will turn up on most of the entries on the page. So,
amazing.
Matt, great talk. So be well, and let's proceed. Huh?
Amazing. Well, have a great day. Thank you so much for who you are and everything that you do. I'll let you get on with your day, but thank you so much for everything. And yeah, we'll definitely chat soon.
Okay.
See you later.
So long.
Okay, bye.
Bye.